Saints head coach Dennis Allen recaps day 4 of the Saints training camp. Ladies and gentlemen, we are starting to get interviews and highlights and reports of every day of training camp. So as it's a very fluid situation because day 1, a player or a player group or a personnel group or a side of the football may be terrible. Day 2, they may be incredible, right? So if you hear that Derek Carr has thrown 8 touchdowns and no interceptions on day 1, don't put all of your stock into that because on day 2, he may throw 8 interceptions and 0 touchdowns. So training camp is for making mistakes. Training camp is for learning, which players are emotionally and physically where they need to be this close to the NFL season. So I will try and continue these updates on a day-to-day basis versus just, all right, here's week 1 of training camp, here's week 2. So again, this is Dennis Allen recapping day 4 of training camp. Let's get into it.
I think last practice in shells, we'll be able to put the pads on. We got a day off tomorrow. We'll put the pads on Monday, and we'll start practicing real football. So excited about seeing that. I think we had a good first 4 days to get started.
Yeah, and that part's important too, like the part about getting into real pads and real football, because now, especially on the offensive and defensive line, it's one thing to hit blockers, it's one thing to hit an assistant coach who's holding a pad, but when you have an NFL player across from you, when you're Talise Fuaga and you are trying to block, Cam Jordan versus some random assistant coach, things get real, right? Running backs, instead of hitting a hole that is just a bunch of cones or a whatever set up, hitting a hole with real moving players, especially moving players who are NFL level players, that is a whole different level of practice.
And I think we're making some progress. Obviously, we've got a long way to go, but excited about putting pads on Monday.
Anything stand out to you after the first 4 practices?
Yeah, I just think the competition between both sides has been good. Got a lot of effort on both sides. We've taken the ball away a few times defensively. We've had a few explosive plays offensively. So I think there's a little bit of back and forth between the two units. And
I wonder if and we won't really probably ever know this unless Dennis comes out and says it, but I wonder if Clint Kubiak and this new offensive coaching staff, from what we've heard about how intense they are and how much energy they have and how much attention to detail and how high the standard is, I wonder if because of that, if it has alleviated some of the pressure on Dennis to really focus on offense, something that he is not his strong suit. And that's not to say anything bad about Dennis. Sean Payton was the same way, where the more Sean had his hands on the defense, the worse the Saints were. If you go look at those 7-win seasons with Payton and Breeze, the defense was terrible. So a lot of coaches are like that, where the more they have to focus on what they don't know, the worse. So I wonder if, because of how detailed Kubiak and company seem to be, I wonder if Dennis can really drop back now and say, okay, I can get back to what I want. I can get back to focusing on the defense, focusing on these players, focusing on turning the offense over, things like that. And that's only a positive for the Saints if that is the case.
I think that's what you're looking for in a good football team is, both units having their plays.
Yeah, you talk about guys flashing. Would you say Mason Tipton has done that so far?
Yeah, I think so. This is one of these, rookie free agents out of Yale that, I really didn't know a lot about. One guy we spent a lot of time talking about in the draft process. And look, I think anytime you see guys like that, I think that's a credit to our scouting department.
Mason Tipton is the most Yale-sounding player of all time. Also, this kind of gives you a look into roster building. People think that the head coach is always involved in roster building or whatever. There's a lot that goes into it. I mean, just like Dennis said, he has no clue who Mason Tipton is. Wasn't part of his draft process. Didn't know a lot about him. That's all scouting. It's all the scouting. It's all the front office. So, it's not always the case. Obviously, first-round picks, high-level free agents, the head coach, the coordinators are going to have some say in that. But roster building is very detailed when it comes to really filling out the full roster. And sometimes that is, the scouting department trying to find somebody. So it's always important to remember it's easy to be like, why isn't Loomis finding blank players? Why isn't Allen signing blank players? It's a trickle-down effect, too, to where you're saying, what is the scouting department doing? Why aren't they finding the free agents? Why does certain teams seem to always be able to find the 5th round, 6th round, 7th round undrafted free agent who become Pro Bowlers? It's because their scouting department is great.
And their ability to, identify players, and there's a management to the draft, and for us to be able to identify that player as a guy that, has skill set that we like, that might have a chance, and then of course we got to be able to get him to sign as a free agent. But he's certainly somebody that's caught my eye in the first 4 days, and really go back into the spring.
Do you know what the scouting staff liked about him? Like, what did they tell you about him?
I think the intelligence and the speed. I think that was the main thing that we looked at was, this kid can run, and he's smart, not just yell smart, he's football smart, and I think there's a difference.
100%. I think it's always funny whenever someone comes from Yale or Harvard and then they're like, oh, their football IQ is high. It's like Yale isn't teaching football, right? Like Harvard isn't teaching football. Yes, obviously, if you go to Harvard or Yale, you have certain mental capabilities, but being football smart and being Ivy League smart is absolutely a different thing. And you don't have to go to Yale or Harvard to be football smart.
Spencer, look out there today.
I thought overall he looked pretty good. I mean, this was a hell of a throw on the corner route over here on this side versus kind of a two-man looking coverage. So, I think all of these guys, every quarterback, I think, has had their moments where they've done the things that we think they're capable of doing, right? And so now the key is, how can we get that to be more and more consistent every single day, every single play, every single practice, every single rep? And I think that's what we're working towards. But I think you can see the flashes of, when he does it right, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we talk about all the time, but these players are highly touted, highly skilled NFL players, especially someone like Spencer Rattler, who is highly touted in high school, highly touted in college. We all know the physical capabilities, right? The goal is, and what makes a great player at any position is where your baseline is a high level, and then your great is a little bit higher, and then your elite level, you see every once in a while. We always talk about that with Derek Carr. Derek Carr is the quarterback of the New Orleans Saints, and the expectation is for him to be above average baseline, to be great every once in a while, and then to be elite on rare occasions, but it's still possible. Then you have someone like Patrick Mahomes, whose baseline is great, and then elite happens, every once in a while, and then on a whole nother level happens rarely. Like that's what makes a player. So for Rattler, for Haener, for Carr, it's not about the individual moments, because they can all have those. Those are expected. The positive moments and the negative moments, both, they're expected to happen. The whole goal is to see how consistent you can be with the high level of play. And that's what makes a great player. If you look at any great player at any position, you can basically boil it down to that. You can basically boil it down to what's their baseline, what do they do most of the time, what do they do some of the time, and what can they do on occasion. For bad players, right, let's just take Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, his baseline is bad. Sometimes he can be average. Every once in a while, he can be good. And then at his absolute highest level, he can be above average, somewhere in there. And that is a good way to look at players in the NFL.
Dennis, can you get a sense of where the run game is right now before you guys go to pads?
Yeah, look, it's really hard to tell right now. Run.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's hard to tell offensive line, defensive line, running game, things like that. It's very difficult to see exactly where you're going to be with that until you can get into pads, because it's just so easy to say, oh, well, the holes are really opening up here. So, yeah, it's against, cones and mailboxes.
Run game, run defense, it's hard to tell right now. We'll have a better feel for it when we're able to put the pads on and, really thud up the ball carrier and things of that nature. And you will see a little bit more of, you get out into these environments sometimes and you're watching the play and, You know, you don't, when we're not, you know, really hitting or thudding everything up, you know, it's hard to tell whether a guy could or couldn't make a play, right? And so I think we'll have a better idea when we put the pads on. But I do think there's some understanding of what we're trying to do. I think there's some cohesiveness, you know, up front.
Yeah, I mean, and part of it right now is less about making that play or making the tackle or whatever, and it's more about understanding what they're actually trying to do from a vision standpoint. Like, how does this work? What is this wide zone run scheme? How does it look? What, you know, just getting that vision is the first thing they really need to do. It's not something that these guys have done for 10 years, you know. So having these 4 days before actually putting pads on, great thing for the Saints. Great thing for what they're trying to do, because they got to see it first. And being able to see the vision of this running game is probably right now, I would say, more important than, you know, breaking a tackle or hitting a hole or what have you. Just knowing, okay, what actually are we trying to accomplish here?
Front with how we're blocking things. I think our guys are working in concert pretty good together. So that's been encouraging.
And might be a little too early on this one too, but in the first 2 days, what have you seen from Nick Saldiveri?
Probably the same thing that, you know, I was talking about with, you know, a lot of these guys, you know, in particular the young guys. I mean, I've seen some really good things from him, some athletic movement skills from him that I think have been good, and then I've seen a lot of things that he's got to, you know, work to improve on. And so, but again, look, he's making progress. Now the key is we got to make some pretty fast progress.
Yeah,
you know, and so
100%. That's the key with a lot of these players at these big time positions, where development is cool, progress is cool, but these guys really don't have the benefit of a long progression. More than likely, Nick Saldiveri is going to be the left guard, the starting left guard. So whatever development, whatever progress he needs to make to go from being a good young player to a good young starter needs to happen quick. And that goes for everybody. It goes for every position. You know, whatever Tulise Fuaga doesn't have unfortunately, he can't just be a good young player. He needs to be a good left tackle. He needs to be a good starting left tackle. Same with Trevor Penning, same with anybody else. You know, same with Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry, Cedric Wilson, whoever's playing wide receiver. It's like, we don't really have the time for these guys to come along slowly and develop. Certain players are being asked to do that very, very quickly in order for this team to be good.
So that's what I'm looking for out of him is accelerate the process a little bit.
We didn't see Brian Brzee out there today.
He's dealing with a foot injury.
You guys
where's Lattimore at? Like, is he expected to miss a lot of time?
I'm not going to get into time frames with him, or anybody really, in terms of time frames of when guys will, you know, be back. He's dealing with a hip flexor injury.
What have you guys liked about Will Harris? It seems like he's getting a good look out.
Yeah, look, size, athleticism, speed. You know, he's a rangy safety, and he comes to work every day. He's a grinder, so all those things are good. You know, I think he's enough.
Going back to the Lattimore thing with his hip flexor, it always blows my mind when, like, injuries, they happen all the time, but it's crazy how much they're expected to play through certain injuries. Like, think about, so if you've been watching the channel for a while, a couple of months ago, I had a horrific hip flexor injury while I was deadlifting, and basically blew my abdomen and hip flexor out of my you know, groin. Like, it was a horrible injury. Couldn't sleep in a bed, had to sleep sitting up, could barely walk, couldn't drive. Brutal. And I didn't do nothing. I mean, I could barely even put on jeans. Like, I could barely even tie my shoes, much less run, much less play an athletic, you know, do something athletic. But I was out, or at least hurt, or at least, you know, taking care of it for about a month. If I'm an NFL player and I do something like that, and you're missing 4 to 5 weeks, that's almost the entire season. I mean, how many times have you been over and just pulled your lower back or something, or pulled, you know, your neck or your shoulder? I remember one time I was, not pretty recently, I was sleeping and I woke up and I like turned my head quickly and pulled my trap over here, and it was just like seizing up and cramping. And I always think about what happens if the morning of the Super Bowl, something like that happens. Like, what if the morning of the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes turns his head, boom, all of a sudden he's got spasms in his trap, or, something happens to his shoulder. He bends over, does something. And the answer is always like, oh, well, they'll just shoot him up, right? Okay, same. Like, all of a sudden you got Patrick Mahomes shot up in his trap to play in the Super Bowl. You never hear about that kind of stuff. And I'm sure it happens all the time. But it's just crazy how fast these guys are expected to bounce back from injury.
Another one that, the more he gets accustomed to what we're doing defensively and the way we're asking our guys to operate back there, I think he'll get even more and more comfortable at the position. And I think he's a guy that, potentially there could be multiple roles for. So, but, that I think is going to really be determined, over the course of the next, month or 6 weeks, whatever the case may be.
Dennis, with there being so much, newness in the offensive line, how much does Eric McCoy's job increase his awareness around him?
Well,
Increases a lot. I mean, McCoy is going to have to be the glue of that, especially with not only the newness of who is where. I mean, you're talking about right now, theoretically, a third or 3 spots on that line are new, with Fuaga on the left, Saldivari on the left guard, and then Penning on the right at right tackle. So McCoy is going to have to be, the guy. He's going to have to be what Ramczyk was before, of like the true anchor, the true leader, the true veteran of that offensive line.
Obviously, that's a huge factor. Look, the center position in general is the communicator on the offensive line. He's the guy that's, making sure, we understand, where we're working, and being able to get it adjusted when the picture changes. And so the communication starts with him. And so I think he's got, a big part of that. And in particular, because we do have so many new pieces, in particular young pieces on the offensive line, I think that and Caesar's role, I think, has to increase.
Yeah, I mean, you got 2 veterans. You got 2 veterans and 3 completely new. Basically, you can say 3 rookies, because they're all playing new positions, or they're starting for the first time, or what have you. So, Caesar and Eric McCoy are going to have to be absolute A-plus players in their own right, but they're also going to have to be big-time leaders when it comes to those other guys.
When you were interviewing offensive coordinator candidates, how much did you bring up Taysom's role? Or were you interested to see if those candidates had a vision for Taysom, and then in relation to Clint, did something selfish about?
Yeah, I don't think it was really that.
Taysom is cool, but when you're interviewing an offensive coordinator, you're not going to say, hey, what before we get into the big picture stuff, what do you have for our middle-aged Swiss Army knife? Taysom is awesome in his own right, but that's not going to be the focal point of your offensive coordinator hiring process. Like, what Clint Kubiak does with the offense as a whole, you're worried about. What he does with Taysom, I'm not really concerned about. I mean, I think Taysom's really good, but Taysom is on the downslope of his career. I mean, Taysom is not going to be – he's currently not a focal point of the offense. He's not going to be a focal point of the offense. He's good in his small bursts, but I would think that was a very tiny portion of the offensive coordinator interview process.
What's the scheme? What are the things that you believe in? And then within that, how do you adjust your scheme to fit what some of your guys can do? And
right.
Certainly Taysom's name came up in conversation, but it wasn't like that was a huge, talking point.
And I know Taysom hasn't been a traditional quarterback in a while now here, but I don't think we've seen him throw a pass in a minute. Just how is he kind of handling that?
Awesome. Yeah, he's been awesome.
Taysom's a pro. Taysom's a pro's pro. I've said this for months now. I think the days of Taysom Hill being a quarterback is over. I think that was a Sean Payton thing. And you pay Derek Carr $100+ million to be the quarterback. You want him under center, or you want him playing quarterback. The more I've never understood that. I know sometimes too, whenever teams get caught up in like the wildcat or whatever, or direct snaps, a lot of the times it's like, if it's 3rd and 5 and you're you would rather have your running back take a direct snap, or you'd rather have, what does that say about your quarterback? That's the quarterback's job. And I think it's one of those things that was cute, one of those things that was fun, but I'm much more of a let the player that you brought in to pick up those first downs and to get those yards and do all that, let them do it.
Handled everything that we've thrown at him, and we've thrown a lot at him. He's playing a lot of different positions, a lot of different areas.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that you got to think about with Taysom too. Is like everyone's learning this offense, this new offense. Taysom's learning it like 4 times because Taysom's learning special teams. Taysom's learning what he's doing as a running back, as a tight end, as a receiver. If he is lining up a quarterback from some of those direct snap plays, he's with multiple personnel groups. So Taysom has got to fast track learning this offense more than anybody. Besides maybe Carr, because Carr has to learn what every single player is doing.
Shifts, alignments, positions, but he's handled it like a true pro. And look, there's a lot of guys that have an athletic skill set, but you can't throw that much on them because they can't handle it mentally. This is a guy that can handle a ton mentally, and it's been fun for me to see a fresh vision for how we can utilize this player.
Yeah,
it's not just as the Wildcat quarterback. There's a lot of other things that this guy can do.
100%. That's a great answer too, because we keep talking about how it's time to move on from Sean Payton and his culture and his ideas. Same with Taysom, where as we know Taysom, let's see a fresh way to utilize him. Taysom kind of got boiled down to direct snap, quarterback, basically fullback dives is what fullback power type situation. So yeah, let's see him as a tight end. Let's see him in motion. Let's see him as that Kyle Juszczyk / Deebo Samuel / George Kittle kind of player. So I'm excited for that as well. And Taysom kind of got pigeonholed into a very specific kind of player, especially last year. I mean, he ran the exact same 2 plays over and over again. The fake RPO, sometimes an RPO with a fullback where okay, he's just going to fake the handoff to the fullback and follow the fullback. And he was good at it, sure. But let's see how they can utilize him more. And I hope it's in that passing game of him motioning from a fullback, motioning out to like a wing back, to motioning out to like kind of the tight end set, and then how it can be used in space.
Both in the running game and the passing game.
Do you see like a clear vision for him, or is it still sort of a work in progress?
I think everything's a work in progress.
Yeah, well, the clear vision is he's going to do a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he's going to do a lot of stuff. He's gonna run routes both from inline, out wide, out of the backfield.
Perfect.
He's gonna block.
Exactly what I'm talking about.
He's gonna run the ball from the backfield.
Good.
Okay,
run the ball from the backfield is different. I'm assuming he means as like a fullback or maybe even as a halfback. So that is something we haven't seen. Him taking a handoff like that. That's something we haven't seen in the past. So that's interesting.
So, yeah, I mean, I see him as a guy that's going to do a ton of different stuff. He's going to line up at the quarterback position at some point in time.
Yeah.
So
the direct snap quarterback kind of powers.
I think he's an awesome weapon to have, and I think he's extremely selfless in terms of a person, in terms of a player, and just wants to do whatever he can to help the team win. And I know I appreciate that.
Dave, we've seen a lot of Kool-Aid the last 2 days on the outside.
Say it again?
We've seen a lot of Kool-Aid the last 2 days on the outside. How valuable are these reps for him right now? What are you looking for him to show?
Well, extremely valuable. I mean, he's a rookie that missed all the spring. So he's 1,000 reps behind. So every rep that he can get is a learning experience for him. Good news for him is that he's smart. He comes from a system that did a lot in college. Fundamentally and technique, he's sound, and yet there's differences in terms of how we do things compared to what he did in college, and so he's got to get up to speed on those things. So
I mean, it's really unbelievable. Like every time we go through this with the training camp, we talk about this. It's insane how many young players we have, how many players we have at new positions. I mean, for the oldest team in the NFL, it's pretty wild. When you're talking about 3 of your 5 offensive linemen are basically rookies. When you look at the wide receiver group, very young. Very young. When you're talking about Olave, Rashid, even if you drop it down to A.T. Perry and Bub Means, and then obviously your Cedric Wilsons and what have you, then even the running backs. Kendra Miller's hurt now, but we hear a lot about Kendra Miller. We hear a lot about Jordan Mims. You flip the ball over to the defensive side. You're hearing a lot about what can Kool-Aid do, and so Chase Young. Chase Young's 24. So this team, for being an older team with veterans and a core group that's known, a lot of position battles, a lot of youth, a lot of first-time starters, and there's a lot to be excited about.
So, but he'll be a quick study, and look, he's just got to get out here and get the reps.
What are all the positions Taysom has played?
Well, he's played tight end, he's played running back.
I think the question was, what all positions has Taysom played? Which, we all know, it's such a weird question because you know the answer. What could Dennis say that would surprise you?
He's played fullback. He's played wide receiver. He hasn't played any defense yet.
Yeah,
he's played personal protector.
Yeah, if he said left guard, that would probably be the only thing that could surprise me.
He's been a kickoff returner. I'm probably missing something, but just about every potential skill position that you can think of.
Yeah.
He's done it. Punt rush.
And there's different alignments for each of you.
You're out there watching, aren't you?
A rare smile, a rare laugh from Dennis.
Because he's been a quarterback, does that allow you to kind of just put off him throwing the ball if need be? You know he can do it. So
yeah. Look,
it's a crazy question too. If they're going to run plays with him throwing the football, he's going to take those reps in practice. He's not going to. That'd be like saying oh, we know Derek Carr can throw the ball, so let's not make him throw the ball in practice.
There's only.
You gotta get timing with your receivers. You have to get timing with the play. That was a crazy question.
He can handle a lot, right? But at some point, why don't we get him good at the things that maybe he hadn't done quite as much,
or that we expect him to do? If you expect him to throw the ball, whatever, 20 times a season, then you expect him to run tight end routes 40% of the time. We're only 4 days into training camp. You're going to focus mostly on what he's going to be doing the most.
Well, let's get him good at those things, and then it's kind of like riding a bicycle a little bit. We'll be able to get him back on the bike a little bit and line him up at the quarterback position some.
And is him throwing the ball, let's say you wanted to install plays that be the throwing option, is that something that comes up more in the regular season?
Damn, is this guy a beat reporter for TaysomHill.com? This guy's got about 8 questions in a row about Taysom Hill throwing the football, brother. Let's spread it out a little bit. Get the mic away from this guy.
Yeah, well, look. Yeah, I think the obvious thing is how are teams playing him when he's at the quarterback position?
Yeah.
And if we're getting advantageous looks to be able to run the football, then it makes sense to run the football.
Yeah, if they're putting 10 people in the box, throw it.
If we're getting advantageous looks to throw the football, then it makes sense to throw the football.
Yeah.
I don't know what those looks are going to be yet until we kind of get into the season and see how
cut
teams,
this guy's mic. How many questions does he get?
Want to try to play him. Now, look, we got a pretty good idea how he's been played in the past. And based on the teams that we play, we'll probably go into each game plan with a little bit of an idea of what we want to do there.
When you look at joint practices, I know you have a 2-day, right? Still with the. Have you heard talk or coaches talk about a preference more now towards the 1 day? And do you have any idea why that is? They talk about
well, I think this.
I would assume 2-day practices can get a little testy. Making, not to mention if you're doing joint practices and you're seeing a team twice. It's a whole lot. You're seeing that team once, the team kind of disguises what they're trying to do. You see them twice in practice. It's almost like you get a real look into what they're trying to do. Plus, I would assume the players gets a little tense. Going after people 2 days in a row probably can cause squabbles. We always see joint practices. Some of them devolve into chaos. So having 1 day joint practices would probably alleviate a lot of that.
Yes, I think, you get an opportunity to work against a lot of different looks instead of the same look, all the time. the rules of the game are you can only have 2 joint practices with one team.
Yeah.
You can have up to 4 total joint practices. And so I think.
So I guess they're saying that if you're doing one day and you do 4, you're seeing 4 different teams, 4 different looks, 4 different, a little bit of variability versus 2 teams for 2 days, which you're seeing just, the same thing for that second day on each situation. So makes sense.
We're not doing that, so it's probably a better question for other coaches, but they get an opportunity to work against 3 different teams, potentially, and 3 different offensive schemes, defensive schemes, special team schemes. Some of this may have to do with the new kickoff rule, and they want to get a look at what other teams are doing.
It doesn't have anything to do with maybe they feel that like 2 days increases the chances of like a fight or something. Have you ever heard anyone talk about that? Or?
Yeah, I think that's probably. I haven't done the study.
I mean, this is just, again, me being ahead of the game. I said that 30 seconds ago. Really, sometimes I even surprise myself.
But I'd say my gut reaction is that you probably have a little bit more of that going on day 2 than you do during day 1. You go to a joint practice, you have the first day's practice. One team or the other is going to feel like they got the better of the other team. Those coaches are going to go yell at their players. Their players are going to be pissed off, and then that's how that stuff happens, right? I mean, that's typically, kind of how that happens. I think, look, the big thing, with joint practices, I think, you got to kind of put a lot on the head coaches to try to get that stuff, under control ahead of time. And look, certainly there's no foolproof way, but you're talking about guys competing at a high level, and but yeah, I think it's probably an accurate statement.
A couple more with the Tipton or guys like him. How much curiosity is there or background on when it's apparent that he's a legit prospect? Okay, well then why did he go to this small program? Was it just because he was a late bloomer, or?
Yeah, I think
there's a lot of factors. The question was, like, if he's such a good prospect, why did he go to the small program? I mean, there's so many factors to go into that. Why a player chose a school, regional location, playing time, did they have family ties? Did they prioritize the academics? I mean, there is a million different reasons of why a player goes to a certain program.
We're always kind of trying to figure those things out just a little bit. But I do think that's part of the deal. Sometimes it's sometimes it's an academic issue. Sometimes it's a size issue. Sometimes it's some of these guys are 130 pounds when they come out of high school, and then all of a sudden they, get into college and they get to be 185, 190 pounds, and they become a different type player. So, but you see guys all the time, coming from some of these smaller programs that end up making it. Now, if you want to talk about percentages, there's a lot more percentage that are making it from, the bigger programs, obviously. But there's football players in a lot of different places, and you just have to, go try to find them. And look, I think our scouting staff has done as good as anybody going and finding those guys.
So Tipton probably wasn't an academic issue, unless it was the good kind where he just really wanted to go to Ivy League.
Sometimes you're too smart to play football, but I don't know if he's in that category. All right? Okay, guys.
Weird questions, but good to hear. Dennis Allen, obviously, we're a day away. We're a couple days away from pads and some real looks at what this team is going to be. Exciting times, ladies and gentlemen. Get on down in the comments. Let me know what you thought about all of Dennis's answers. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.